you?
Good, thank you.
I've been loving y'all's conversations. They've been really interesting.
Okay, I've just started the recording and I'm getting a little bit of a delayed effect here. I don't know if y'all are or not, but I am. But it's good to see y'all. Hope you had a happy 4th and a safe 4th of July as well. But we'll go ahead and get started tonight. And I have begun the recording already. So let's go ahead and begin. What we're going to talk about tonight a little bit are chapters 10, 11, and 12, which cover the topics of inclusive environments, communication, and behavior. So we'll just go ahead and dive into that a little bit. Let's see, our videos this week, the first one was about facilitated communication, and it was a short, I think about 3 minutes or so, but I think it speaks volumes about the way we sometimes expect students with disabilities, particularly those more significant disabilities, to respond to our instruction. That particular video, I don't know if you've all had an opportunity to see it or not yet, but there's a lot of noise in the background. There's a lot of adult conversation going on amongst the teachers and paras and so forth that are in the room with the students who are around the table. And there's a lot of hand over hand instruction going on. Have you had a chance to view that video yet? Anybody? Okay. Well, when you see it, if you haven't seen it yet, I want you to take particular note of whether or not you see purposeful movement in the students that are seated at the table and at the computers or the screens that are the devices that are in front of them, not necessarily screens, but the devices, the communication devices that are in front of them. And I think some of the students do have some purposeful movement. Y'all excuse me while I wipe my drippy nose. Whereas others have very little purposeful movement. And so I want to talk for just a second about what you think about that kind of facilitated communication. Do you see a purpose in that sort of communication where we're doing a lot of hand over hand instruction and moving kids' hands on top of letters and having them type particular messages? I think for some of the students, there's not a lot of understanding of what they're typing, but are we teaching them the steps to communication? What do you think about that? Is that just going through the motions, or is it going through appropriate motions that have a purpose? Anybody have a thought on that?
Well, I sat there and I watched the video yesterday evening because I was really interested to see what was going on when I first pulled it up, and I only really, it was trying to get the kids to communicate back and forth. Some of the kids were trying to be verbal and use the apparatus, whatever the little keyboard deal was, but then there's a couple where pulling them up and choosing, it almost looked like choosing letters for him, and he was just often visually watching something else. So was that really purposeful? Probably not, because he didn't seem anywhere interested in using the apparatus.
Okay.
Whereas the a couple of the other ones were interested in using it, and they were like, no, don't touch, I want to do it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I kind of like had to take it back a step to where, when we teach little ones to use the PEC symbols. At first, it does not seem, it seems pointless, but they eventually get it. So I mean, if you kind of compare it to that, then I could see how it could be, it was purposeful.
I think I agree with you on that, Michelle. Initially, it doesn't seem to have a lot of purpose, but maybe we're working toward that purpose by teaching some of those beginning steps. Carrie, have you had a chance to see it yet?
No, I haven't watched the video
Okay.
yet, but I did a lot of hand over hand. And
Well,
again, you're right. It's that initial step.
Go ahead.
It's that initial step you have to do. I mean, that's kind of the beginning process of any kind of ABA teaching. It's that hand over hand, errorless learning. And then, you know, those kids, whether they look actively engaged, you don't know. If you don't know that student, you don't know, because they may not have enough eye control or eye gaze time to look at what you're doing, but eventually they will. So it's that repetition that you have to have anyway. So you can't make that judgment from a short video.
That's a really good point. I wanted to get your input because you've had so much experience with the more significantly disabled populations. And I'm glad you used the term errorless learning that we touched on briefly last week, because I think that's exactly what we're going for here, is that errorless learning, where we establish that baseline of no mistakes. We're going to do something repetitively without mistakes until students get accustomed to that, get into practice with that, with the system that we're using, with the routine that we're getting accustomed to, until it just becomes something a bit more natural. Michelle Guest, were you going to say something?
Well, I was going to say, you had mentioned that the people were talking in the background and that kind of thing, but if you listen to some of the comments being said, they were communicating, and then they noticed that the other kids were trying to communicate. And so to me, that was like they were learning within the environment of communicating with using that apparatus. So I think it was a naturalistic environment to be able to use that apparatus.
Good. And I think too, what we're doing there is we're pairing oral language with the written, or the typed, or somehow communicated in the touch, on the touch screen, the two types of language. And so when we're pairing both, students are going to have the opportunity to hear it and see it at the same time. And that's a positive as well, to be able to pair both avenues of communication at the same time. So our chapter 11 talks a lot about communication this week. That's the focus of chapter 11, is teaching those communication skills and how we actually instruct that. Some of you may have chosen communication kinds of skills for your choice topic to focus on this week with the activity. I think it's number 2, activity 2, is it? No, that was last week. The choice topic for this week. So perhaps some of you may have chosen some of those kinds of things, but your chapter talks about all the different ways that we do communicate. Now, that particular video that we just referenced is using an alternative or augmentative kind of communication strategy. But there are lots of other kinds of strategies that we can use for communication. Your textbook talks about gestural communication. We may use a broad type of signing. We may use something that's really a specific type of signing. We may use American Sign Language, or we may use something that's, like I say, much broader than that. We may use something like Carrie referred to a moment ago, the PECS. I think, was that Carrie that said that about the PECS system, or was that Michelle B? One of you said something, somebody said something about PECS a minute ago. And which one of you was that? Who said PECs?
It was me.
It was
That
you,
Michelle
Michelle.
B.
Okay, Michelle. But that would be a symbol type of, or in many cases, PECs is symbol. Sometimes it does come on down to word, well, picture, but we do have some levels. Don't we have some levels of PECs that does develop on into using the word? Do we ever get into words? I mean, I know PECs actually means picture, picture communication, but at the higher levels, do we ever take it to the word?
Each icon has, yes. Yes, you can.
Okay, we do take it to the word sometime. Okay. So the symbol for most of those, you know, it starts with the very basic with the word, I'm sorry, with the sometimes the actual photograph of the item, and then more of a drawing, and then sometimes more like a computer screen symbol, and then maybe the word itself, depending upon where the child is in their recognition of symbols. And then some of our students, like if you were with us last week or had an opportunity to watch the video, Meredith talked with us about some of our students are actually able to read some words, sometimes a lot of words, depending upon their level of disability, their type of disability. And so we do have some students who do have word recognition, just depending upon where they are on the disability scale. And for those students, you know, word recognition and sound symbol association is appropriate. And we would want to use reading vocabulary with those students. So we do want to know, though, the system that's most appropriate for the students that we're working with, and what it is that we want to use for their communication system. Let's talk for a second about augmentative versus assistive systems of communication. What's the difference there? Anybody know? Augmentative versus assistive. Some of you girls-
Augmentative is like a device, right?
Well, they can both be devices.
Well, assistive would assume that they do have some verbal skills or some communication skills already, correct?
Right. Augmentative is going to take the place of, and assistive is going to help. So assist is going to assist and help, and augment is going to take the place of. Our book also, let's see, the design of alternative or augmentative is on page 248 of your textbook. Talks about that in some detail. And then we get over into instructional strategies beyond that. There's a section on page 253 that talks about learners who are non-symbolic. And we do have students who are non-symbolic in their learning. And what do we do with those students who don't have that understanding of symbol relationship? A PEC system, a picture association system is not going to work with those students because they can't make that association between a picture and the thing that it represents, or a symbol and the thing that it represents. What can we do with those students? Any ideas?
Is that like when we would use the little 3D objects?
Yeah.
Yeah, I had some that would do a schedule, but they couldn't do a visual schedule. So what they had was like a miniature version of what they were doing. So like when it was time to go, they had the little bus that they would take, or they had a cup and a spoon, like the little kid-sized version. that was lunch.
Yeah.
So is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's good. Okay, sometimes if a student does not even make that level of association, we may have to look at things that are even more remote to most learners than that. Like natural gestures that just sort of happen during the context of what's going on in the classroom. Natural gestures, eye gaze, vocalizations, things like that. Because even what you said a moment ago, Carrie, is still in a way a symbolic type of communication. Even a small tangible is a type of communication, a type of a representation of that communication. So sometimes we've got to
Right.
step
Well, I
even
also had
further. Pardon me?
I had a student that would look up for yes and down for no, or he would smile or frown. You know, if he was agreement, he would smile. If he was disagreeing, he would frown. He was very clearly communicating that way. And then he would make some like verbal sounds to kind of alert us that something was wrong. So
Right. And sometimes that
that was his favorite form of communication.
right. And sometimes that's the depth of communication that we're going to receive from some students. Let's talk a little bit about applied behavior analysis. We've got a little bit of that in our video this week. And then of course it can be applied to both our communication chapter and our behavior chapter, chapters 11 and 12. So how many of you have had some exposure to ABA or applied behavior analysis in the work that you've done? Anybody have any exposure to ABA in your work? If you're a special educator, you may have. If you're a general educator, you probably have not. So there's a video with an example of ABA, and it's good to have a working knowledge of ABA, particularly as you become more acquainted with our populations with autism, because particularly our students with more significant degrees of autism, it's a pretty popular methodology for dealing with autism. And so oftentimes if you're planning to be a diagnostician or even as a classroom teacher or other professional in the schools, you're going to run into to parents who may request that as a service for their students, or you may have teachers who have experience with that and perhaps want to deliver that as a service. You may have therapists, occupational therapists, or others who have experience with that and perhaps want to discuss that in ARD committee meetings. Usually school districts will give no, I shouldn't say that. I was about to say usually school districts will give a no to ABA, but I'm finding that that's less and less true. School districts sometimes give a qualified yes to ABA, but as a therapy in schools. But sometimes families will press for more and more ABA than schools are willing to provide, because for ABA to be most effective, it needs to be one-on-one. And most of our schooling does not occur in a one-on-one setting. We don't deliver most instruction one-on-one. Even with our most significantly impaired populations, a lot of that instruction is not delivered one-on-one. We do it in small groups, maybe 2 to 1 or 3 to 1, but not in a one-on-one. And even if we do it in a one-on-one, oftentimes it's with a paraprofessional assisting us. And to give ABA in the way that it's intended, it needs to be with an individual who is certified. And a certified ABA specialist comes to the district at a pretty handsome price. And so I don't know too many districts who give just carte blanche ABA therapy whenever it's requested. In order to do that most effectively, at the level recommended by most ABA therapists, it would be to the tune of about 40 hours per week. Now, there aren't too many things I like to do 40 hours a week. I don't know about you all, but doing the same thing over and over 40 hours a week gets monotonous to me. And we don't ask most children in our school settings to do the same thing over and over and over for 40 hours a week. We don't even ask children to be at school for 40 hours a week. But that's what a lot of ABA specialists would recommend is 40 hours a week. Now, what we do get is a lot of compliance when we have something that's being requested over and over for 40 hours a week. We get a lot of yeses. We get a lot of compliance. So we might not be surprised that ABA can be pretty effective with lots and lots and lots of repetition. But it's not always practical in a school setting. So it becomes a sticking point sometimes between families and schools as to whether or not we can logically deliver that in a school setting for children. Sometimes parents will pull their children out of a school setting and have ABA delivered in a home setting one-on-one, because it does deliver results. Children who sometimes are very non-compliant become compliant with lots and lots of ABA therapy. So it's one of those things that that is a behavioral tactic, behavioral management technique for many children who tend to act out, to have difficulty with communication, whose behavioral issues interfere with communication, and has proved to be effective to some degree with many children with more significant disabilities. And I'm talking primarily those of a neurological or cognitive type of impairment. Certainly not those with significant physical disabilities. So be sure that you watch the video that has the demonstration of ABA. And I would encourage you maybe to do a little more reading on ABA therapies and get a little more of that under your belt. There's also a video. No, it's not a video. It's a section of reading on verbal behavior therapy. And that's about another type of therapy that's not unlike ABA. There are some similarities and some differences. It can also help manage behavior and some communication as well. Sometimes it's compared with the techniques used by Annie Sullivan, the instructor of Helen Keller. And I was a huge fan of the Miracle Worker when I was a young woman. Some of you with that special ed bent as well may be fans of the Helen Keller story, and maybe more particularly the Annie Sullivan story, because she was such a masterful teacher of a young woman with such significant disabilities, and they were able to overcome so many of those obstacles that were part of Helen Keller's youth. And she went on to such success as an adult. But I was just mesmerized by that story as a young person myself, and loved the movie The Miracle Worker. And so I'm fascinated by some of that part of this therapy. I also really enjoyed studying B.F. Skinner's work as an undergraduate and as a graduate student myself. Some of it seems a little harsh, that the whole Pavlovian dog kind of response that we read about, that operant conditioning kind of thinking and training of a person. It doesn't bother us so much if we're thinking about it being an animal being trained, but when we translate that to human behavior, it bothers us a little bit to think about training a child in a particular way. In many ways, that's what ABA is. It's training, but training a human sets us off a little bit when we can compare that with the way we train a pet. It's off-putting. And so it helps me to think back to the water pump scene in The Miracle Worker, to when Helen Keller had the aha moment and made the connection between the word water and the actual water coming from the pump. And you may remember that pivotal scene in that movie. And if not, it's described in this reading about verbal behavior therapy. But making that word association with something tangible and with something, in Helen Keller's case, something tactile, the making the symbol of the word water with the letters in her hand, the symbol, finger spelling of the word water in her hand began to have meaning for her. And so language suddenly came alive for her. And that's what verbal behavior therapy has its foundations in. So you can read that article there about that particular type of therapy and how it can be useful with students with significant cognitive disabilities as well. So this week, our bonus question is going to have to do with this part of our discussion. So I'll ask a question at the end of our quiz about verbal behavior therapy and where some of those foundations are. And you can put either the name Skinner or Sullivan. I'll ask you a name that's associated with verbal behavior therapy historically, and you can put Skinner or Sullivan. Now, don't put B.F. Skinner and don't put Annie Sullivan. Just put Skinner or Sullivan, and that would be either B.F. Skinner, the psychologist, or Annie Sullivan, who would be Helen Keller's teacher. So one of those names, Skinner or Sullivan, either one, is going to be your magic word this week, okay? For your extra 5 points to show me that you were listening to our webinar this week. And I'll add that question to our quiz for a few extra points. And that's our bonus for this week. So let's talk a little bit about inclusive environments. That's chapter 10. What about including children or students, young people? I use that term children too often, I think, because most of my experience is at the elementary and middle school level. But what about students who have more significant disabilities and their inclusion in general education environments? And we talked about this a little bit last week when Meredith was with us, because she was, she's been at every level of pre-K through 12 and has managed to include her students in the general ed environment all along the way. And I always show a video to my undergrad class, which is it's an intro to special education class for teachers to be at the undergrad level. And it's Educating Peter. I don't know if any of you have seen Educating Peter, and then there's a subsequent follow-up sequel to that called Graduating Peter. And I think both of them are available on either Netflix or one of the streaming services. I know that I think Educating Peter, it's just about a 30-minute little special that was, I think it actually won the best short film for the Oscars back in the 90s. And then Graduating Peter is about a little over an hour long. And it followed up a few years later. But Educating Peter is actually about Peter when he was in the 3rd grade. And Peter is now an adult, well into his 30s, maybe even 40 years old. But Peter has Down syndrome and was one of the first kids that was fully included in the state of Virginia, I believe, Blacksburg, Virginia, or that may be West Virginia. Anyway, his father is a faculty member at Virginia Tech. I think that is Virginia, isn't it? Anyway, his dad's a faculty member at Virginia Tech, or was at the time. And it's a very interesting story, but his mother really, really pushed to have him fully included. And the documentary is a fascinating story of the filmmakers went in and basically embedded themselves into his 3rd grade class, the 3rd grade school, and watched the kids in PE and art and music and the cafeteria and the playground and everywhere else. And then also went into the home and got to see Peter's everyday life and how the kids in the 3rd grade class accepted him or did not accept him. But in most cases, they completely accepted him. So you may want to watch that if you get an opportunity. I know you have nothing else to do this summer, but watch videos. But Educating Peter is one of my favorites. You'll have to overlook the great big glasses that the teacher wears. They're very 90s style in her hair and her clothing and so forth. But 90s were the good old days for some of us. But it's a fascinating video to see, for one thing, how the mom really pushes for full inclusion. You can tell she's not a big fan of special ed. But Graduating Peter then picks up basically where that left off and carries him through all the way to post-secondary. And it's another fascinating slice of what inclusion really looks like. Again, the mom has had a bad experience with special ed somewhere along the way and does not want him to set foot in the special ed classroom. She wants him fully included, even, in my opinion, sometimes to the detriment of Peter and the other students. But it's interesting to see how it's all woven together. And there comes a point at which Peter benefits by having some special education time for some functional life skills and things like that he really needs. And the mom wants him to be fully included and embedded with his same age peers, general ed, non-disabled peers. And as I think many of us who have taught general or special education may understand that sometimes kids with disabilities don't just fit in seamlessly with non-disabled peers. Sometimes they need a friend who does have a disability. Sometimes they relate well with another student who does have a disability. And that's what happens with Peter. Peter is almost totally nonverbal. He has a little bit of verbal language, but not much at all. And he has a real difficult time communicating with his peers. And it's interesting to see how the mom blames this on a number of things, most especially his brief time in special education when he was a little boy. She said he didn't have appropriate peer models for language. And of course, we can't know what the real situation was. We weren't there. But I think what was probably going on is that Peter didn't have the capacity for language acquisition at the level at which the mom wanted him to gain language. And that becomes more evident as he gets older, and the speech pathologist is wanting to dismiss him from speech language services. And the mother keeps insisting that he needs more speech language. Well, if you've worked very closely with a speech language pathologist in your career as a teacher, you may know that when a child maxes out cognitively, the speech language pathologist is ready to dismiss them, because you can't acquire language at a higher level than your brain will allow. You can't learn words higher than you can think words. You can't speak words higher than you can think words. And so the speech language pathologist is ready to dismiss. And the mom says, well, I don't understand why he's not learning to talk better. Well, he's maxed out. And the mother has never come to grips with some of those realities in this particular video. So it's a fascinating look at some of those qualities of inclusion. You can see the benefits to Peter and to the other children from the socialization aspect, some of the things that are very highly beneficial to all parties with having Peter in the classroom. You also see some of the things that Peter misses because academically, because the class continues to advance and he's not given, in my opinion, enough direct instruction on the level that he needs, the things that he needs. There aren't enough bodies in the classroom to help him with the things that he needs. So there's a section where he's in a biology class, and the high school teacher is lecturing about the numbers of stomachs that a cow has. And his teacher's aide hands him a little fuzzy, let's see, there's a cat, let's see. No, the teacher has a stuffed cow that he presents to the class. And I think Peter plays with that for a minute, and then he does a color sheet with a cow on it. And, you know, in my opinion, that's not very instructive for a student in a high school setting to do a color sheet of a cow. I don't think that's an appropriate learning goal for a student with a disability at the high school level. So all of those are interesting factors that come into play when we start talking inclusion, appropriate learning goals for students when they are in an inclusive setting. What do we do as far as generalization? Some of these kinds of things that that happen when students are included. So is inclusion,
Kevin.
pardon me?
I was gonna say, I looked up, and the Educating Peter is not on Netflix. I actually found it free on YouTube.
On YouTube.
So, but I didn't look up the Graduating Peter, but the Educating Peter is on YouTube.
Yeah, and I think, like I say, it's only about 30 minutes long, and I think you can see it on YouTube. I'm not sure it's the greatest quality video, but it's a pretty interesting video to catch. So on your quiz this week, you've got some questions about inclusion. What the is there a legal presumption that students with disabilities will be educated with non-disabled peers? What do you think about that? True or false?
True.
That's true. That's true.
Mhm.
So I just gave you the first answer, okay? Some practical strategies for supporting inclusion, collaborative teaming, personnel supports, peer mediated supports. One that would not be, would be alternative educational placements. So AEP is not a good strategy,
Yeah.
okay? Then we've got some about communication. Let's see. Can communication be thought of as a social behavior?
Yes.
Absolutely. Which of the following general types of communicative functions is associated with a student who uses a vocalization to reject an item or action? Would that be behavior regulation, social interaction, or joint attention?
Social interaction.
It's actually behavior.
I say joint attention.
It's actually behavior regulation. So jot that one down.
Say the question again, because
Which of the following general types of communicative functions is associated with a student who uses a vocalization to reject an item or action?
okay, so that would be behavior. Okay.
Okay, let me see here. Well, here's a super easy one. I probably shouldn't give you the super easy one because you'll get that one on your own, won't you?
Give us a hard one.
Okay,
You're gonna give us easy ones. I'd rather have hard ones.
I'm gonna give you, let me see. Okay, the textbook authors discourage the use of all of the following except. Do they discourage the use of response interruption? This is on the topic of behavior. Response interruption, coercion, aversives, or seclusion?
Seclusion.
I would say coercion off the top of my head, but I'm not sure.
Now, listen to the way I stated it. They discourage the use of all of the following except,
Oh,
okay? So listen
Okay.
again, response
So we-
interruption,
Choices again.
response interruption, coercion. Doesn't coercion sound like a bad thing?
yeah.
Okay. Aversives. Aversives sounds like a bad thing too, right?
Yeah,
You know, when we use aversives, if I use an aversive with you, I'm gonna slap your hand. That's an aversive. or seclusion. What does the law say about seclusion? Can I seclude you?
You don't.
No, it's against the
No.
law to
No.
seclude. Okay,
So-
so I can't coerce you. I can't use aversives on you. Because I can't paddle you, can I? Well, I could, but it depends on what
No.
district we work in. It depends on where we work, but we're usually not going to use aversives. And I can't seclude you
Right.
according to the law.
You
So
can't
that leaves response interruption.
behavior.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, I've given you several for free there. All right, it's closing in on quitting time. We've talked a little bit about chapter 10, which is our inclusion, chapter 11, which is communication, and chapter 12, which is behavior. We've talked a little bit about our videos. And I've given you your bonus question. And remember, our two keywords on that are Skinner and Sullivan. Skinner or Sullivan. You don't have to put both. Put Skinner or Sullivan. For BF Skinner or Annie Sullivan. Helen Keller's teacher. Okay. Anybody else? Any comments for the greater good? Oh, one more
When
thing.
do we,
What you got, Michelle? Guest?
I was gonna say, when do we need to let you know about our research topic?
Did I have that written anywhere? I can't remember what the date was.
Yeah.
What did
you
it
said
say?
for us to email you. I didn't print it off to
I can't remember when I wanted it.
do anything, because I had already chosen that. And
Said that we needed to look over the list and we needed to give you our topic, but it didn't say when to give it by that I saw.
Well, when do y'all want to give it to me? Anybody have a suggestion? I'm easy.
By Sunday.
I'm easy like Sunday morning.
Is it due next? Is it due next Sunday?
I don't
So you-
remember.
you just
Somebody-
want an email.
Say again?
You want an email, or can I just tell you right now?
No, you have to email it to me. I want to see it in writing. Okay. And
Good
Sunday
deal.
night, Michelle said Sunday night. How's that? Is Sunday night good for everybody? So you email me by Sunday night? And it's not like I'm gonna paddle you if you don't get it to me by Monday, okay? So, yes. Okay, there are no aversives here. All right, let's see. Here's the other thing I wanted to tell you all. Mansfield ISD is dying for diags. And I told them I don't have any more. I've already got everybody squared away for this coming year. And they said, well, what
Not
are we gonna
me.
do? They said, well, you don't live up here. If you would move up here, you would have a job. Do you want to come up here and work? Michelle,
In Mansfield?
Mansfield,
Oh,
do you want to work in Mansfield, Angela?
Angela.
Angela, do you want to work in Mansfield?
Yes, I actually started.
Angela, if you
can
want to
hear
work in
me? I
Mansfield,
started the application yesterday.
okay, that's all you have to do is tell me and I'll give them your
Yes.
name. Okay. You can have a job if you want one.
Can you?
Yeah,
Okay, thanks.
but let me tell everybody else this too. This is for everybody
I-
else. This is for everybody else in the class too.
Okay,
This is, Angela, you're special because you're about to be ready to do an internship. Nobody else is ready to do an internship. Now, Michelle Guest, if you want to come back up here and work in Mansfield, you can. But
My
everybody
mom
else,
would kill me right now.
okay. Now, Natina, I don't think you're in the DIAG program, but you might be. I don't think you are, but you might be. Everybody else is in the.
No,
DIAG
ma'am, I'm not.
Okay, everybody else is in the DIAG program. And I think most of you are going to be in my first testing class in the fall. Mansfield is so desperate for DIAGs that now the director over there is a good friend of mine. She's a former student of mine. And she said, what am I going to do, Dr. Cavan? And I said, well, you just need to open up some art facilitator positions, because then my people who are going to be in my fall class could go to work as art facilitators. And she said, done. And so she opened up some art facilitator positions, and she's already hired Michelle Bowman, who's up there in the corner of my screen. Michelle, wave your hand. Michelle, wave your hand.
Yay.
Michelle B, wave your hand. There. So Michelle B
Yes, I
has
am.
already been
Yay.
hired, okay, as an art facilitator in Mansfield. Okay, now she hasn't even taken the first testing class yet, but they're going to teach her how to be an art facilitator. And then that will just fold in to a diag position next year. Okay, she's got it made in the shade. Now, Lisa
Nice.
Shockley, who is the director in Mansfield, said to me, if you've got anybody else, send them to me. So
Me.
anybody else? well,
Can you
and-
tell her about me, Dr. Kevin?
I hadn't told her about you because you hadn't taken your test yet, dear. Okay. You and I need to talk as soon as we're done here. Okay.
Okay.
You and I need to talk because you're special. You're different than everybody else that I'm talking to right now. Your diag material, their art facilitator material. Okay. You're special.
Mhm.
Okay. But anybody else that is just going to be taking my testing class this fall is eligible to be an art facilitator right now. Okay. And if you want that job, you need to step forward because Michelle's going to be your buddy. And more than, it's a party if there's more than one of you. All right. So if you live in the Fort Worth area, surrounding area, and Mansfield is appealing to you, I would say, give me a call. I will send Lisa Shockley your name and number, and you need to get on that if you're interested. Okay. If not, if that's too far from you, don't worry about it. But it's a great opportunity if you're interested, and they are clamoring for people. All right. So that's how I'm going to close out tonight. I'm going to turn off the recording, and Angela, you hang on because you and I need to visit for a minute. Okay. So I'm going to stop recording now.